Good, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our chair, vice chair, and rapporteur. Kindly note that the sessions of the committee will be broadcast live on the internet via the ESCAP YouTube page. Please visit ESCAP webpage for live streaming of the event. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now call the meeting to order. We shall now take up Agenda Item 3, Programs of Action for Asia-Pacific Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States, and the Sustainable Development Goals. There will be 2 documents to cover the issues of the committee. We will divide the discussions on these documents into 2 separate segments. And we shall now take up Agenda Item 3A, Prospects for Poverty Reduction in Asia and the Pacific, Progress, Opportunities, and Challenges, especially in the countries with special needs, as referred to in document number E/ESCAP/CMPF1/2. May I now invite the Secretariat to introduce Agenda Item 3, to be followed by the informative presentations by invited high-level panelists. After the panel discussion, the floor will be open for formal statements by delegations and statements from other registered participants at this meeting. And so it is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Oliver Paddison, Chief of Countries with Special Needs Section, Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, to take the floor and introduce Agenda Item 3A. Mr. Paddison, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome today to the session of the Committee on Macroeconomic Policy, Poverty Reduction and Financing for Development. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Agenda Item 3, Programs of Action for Asia-Pacific Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, Small Island Developing States, and the Sustainable Development Goals. This session is on Agenda Item 3A, entitled Prospects for Poverty Reduction in Asia-Pacific and Asia and the Pacific, Progress, Opportunities, and Challenges, especially in the countries with special needs. On behalf of ESCAP, I would like to thank you all for being with us today. The objectives of this session are to invite the committee to discuss and deliberate on the contents of the Secretariat Note E/ESCAP/CMPF1/2, and to seek guidance from the committee on future focus and priority of the Secretariat in assisting member states in tackling poverty reduction, especially in countries with special needs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Sustainable Development Goal 1 calls for ending poverty by 2030. The most recent regional review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, published jointly by ESCAP, the ADB, and UNDP, finds that regional poverty rates have continued to decline. The Asia-Pacific region as a whole saw the proportion of people living in extreme poverty, that is, on less than $1.90 per day in 2001 purchasing power parity, decline from 29.7% for the period of 2000 to 2004 to 10.3% in latest years. While this is a remarkable achievement, the improvements were concentrated in a few countries with large populations, such as Bangladesh, China, and India. In the case of the least developed country group, the poverty rate was still 14.7%. In addition, the region has traditionally relied on economic growth as the principal tool for reducing poverty. Despite progress in reducing income poverty, we have seen glaring disparities in achievement take place between rural and urban areas, and between different income and social groups, genders and ethnic groups. People living in extreme poverty in the region today are now predominantly young, living in rural areas and engaged in agricultural activities. As global and regional growth slows down, developing countries, particularly countries with special needs, can no longer rely on traditional patterns of economic growth, which are heavily dependent on inexpensive labor and export of low value-added products and unprocessed natural resources. Rather, growth and development policies need to be inclusive and comprehensive and must take into account rapidly changing internal and external socio-economic conditions and imperatives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, given the changing dynamics of the regional and global economy and in view of the nature of sustainable development, the Secretariat note highlights the following points as a way forward for combating extreme poverty. 1. Growing inequalities in income and access to opportunities need to be addressed to ensure that no one is left behind. Reducing poverty is not just ensuring sustained economic growth, but also about tackling social exclusion. 2. Resource mobilization strategies and the use of resources need careful reconsideration as traditional sources of finance become increasingly uncertain. Thirdly, fiscal resources need to be deployed to meet investment gaps and to finance the development of inclusive and sustainable infrastructure, education, health, and sanitation. 4. Robust institutions, the rule of law, and a strong and effective state are needed, especially in countries with high levels of domestic and regional instability. Finally, countries need to embark upon a transition to productivity-led economic growth that is supported by skilled human resources, quality institutions, good governance, efficient and productive infrastructure, and well-functioning capital and labor markets. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize the importance that the Secretariat attaches to supporting the development of countries with special needs. This group of countries represents the majority of our member states and shapes the prospects for poverty reduction in the region. I hope that our discussion today will provide more guidance for the Secretariat and member states on how to tackle poverty and ensure inclusive and sustainable development by closing development gaps in the region. This would allow the most vulnerable countries in the region to accelerate their development progress. I thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, for introducing Agenda Item 3A. Now, our discussion on Agenda Item 3A will continue as a panel. The panel will be moderated by His Excellency Mr. Thinley Namgyal, Secretary, Gross National Happiness Commission in Bhutan. So may I now invite Mr. Thinley Namgyal to moderate the session and the distinguished panelists to please take the seat here at the rostrum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. May I begin by introducing the distinguished panelists that will speak at the panel. So with me, I have Mr. Ribon Kom, Deputy Secretary General, National Committee for ESCAP, Cambodia. Mr. Sudhakar Shukla, Economic Advisor, Department of Rural Development, Ministry of Rural Development, India. Mr. August Letlet, Director General, Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, Vanuatu. Mr. Shankar P. Sharma, former Vice Chairman, National Planning Commission, Nepal. I would like to request my panelists to limit your discussion to 7 minutes so that we have enough time for others to raise questions or make their interventions. With this, may I now invite Mr. Ruben Kom, Deputy Secretary General, National Committee for ESCAP Cambodia, to share some thoughts that may be useful for deliberation on agenda item 3A. And in particular, I would like to request if he could touch on what are the lessons learned from Cambodia's experience on economic diversification and poverty eradication. How would you advise LDC peers who wish to diversify the economy and industries? And what are the strategies of your countries to proceed further in this process, especially keeping in mind the Istanbul Programme of Action for LDC? So with this, Mr. Robin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency Moderator. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to be here to share with you some experiences on economic diversification and poverty reduction in Cambodia. Over the past decades, two decades, Cambodia achieved impressive economic growth. GDP growth on average of 7% between 1994 and 2015. It was ranked number 6 fastest growing economy in the world by the World Bank. The GNI per capita has enlarged more than triple from just $300 in 1994 to $1,070 in 2015. This achievement has been driven by agriculture, industry underpinned by government industry and construction sectors, and service sector supported by especially tourism. And at the moment, Cambodia has been classified as a lower middle income country in 2015 by the World Bank, but still take a few more years for LDC graduation, hopefully. Poverty was reduced dramatically from 53% in 2004 to just 13.5% in 2014. It is one of the most impressive poverty reduction in the world as well. On average, poverty reduction has been achieved more than 1.5% annually. And this is a result of implementation of our rectangular strategy for growth, employment, equity, and efficiency, as well as the National Strategy for Development Plan, which is updated every 5 years. Our current rectangular strategy reaffirms our mission and strong commitment to sustainable development and poverty reduction that respond to the people's will and emerging context of national, international developments. And this is corresponding to the commitment of the government in dealing with MDG's Goal 1 of poverty reduction, eradication, poverty and hunger, as well as the Istanbul Programme of Action. The priority poverty reduction actions may include maintaining macroeconomic stability, improving rural livelihoods, expanding job opportunities, improving capacities, strengthening institutions, and improving governance, reducing vulnerability and strengthening social inclusion, as well as promoting gender equity. As a result, poverty reduction was mainly driven by income diversification of rural households, earning from remittances, non-agricultural wages, especially the manufacturing industry, and household businesses. Sustained economic growth has boosted household income and consumption. Poverty is expected to further decline over the next few years. This is underpinned by continued expansion of our services and manufacturing sectors, together with increasing in remittances. However, we are facing the negative impact of slowdown of the textile and construction sectors. For economic diversification, Cambodia is based with growth strategies on national endowments such as agriculture and export of labor-intensive products. In the past, garments and footwear were the only export from Cambodia. The effort to speed up net structural change has been quite successful due to increased in share of industrial sector and gradual reduction of agriculture share in GDP. At the same time, the country has gradually been moving up the manufacturing value chains and managed to export higher value-added products such as electric appliances, spare parts of vehicles, and other components. Agricultural export, primarily milled rice, has also found its different market in different countries in the world. Structural reformation, including construction and garment sectors, have also observed a large proportion of labor from the rural areas that resulted in structural transformation. The contribution of our agriculture has strengthened, and at the same time, the services and industry have been expanded. This is the sign of our successful start of the country's economic diversification that could result from the following efforts. I just make a short summary. The Industrial Development Plan Policy 2015-25 that emphasizes the new economic growth strategy, which stresses importantly on economic diversification, competitiveness strengthening, and productivity enhancement in line with structural transformation of the domestic economy and the evolving global and regional economic architecture. The government of Cambodia considers industrial sector as a growth strategy priority aimed at promoting economic diversification, effectuating profound structural change, and improving competitiveness. Especially for industrial development, the government has made a stride in improving the cost of electricity and logistics, supporting infrastructure and TVET, meaning vocational training and education. To address this gap and mismatch, the government has recently issued the 2017-25 National Technical and Vocational Education and Training Policy. Diversifying export products and destination, that's also on our agenda. This has partly been done through improved trade relationship with our neighboring countries and region, as well as international and regional cooperation. And Cambodia has found new market for our milled rice at the moment. So, for this, I would like to recommend and for our LDC peers that we should follow the way forward of moving from agriculture to industrial diversification, including, as I already mentioned, the industrial development plan policy. We have to do it. We have to revise the reducing cost of doing business, especially the electricity and other logistics, and enhancing human capacity, building our capacity in order to fulfill the gaps and to create value-added products of our manufacturing industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kom, and congratulations on achieving significant economic growth, largely driven by agriculture and tourism, because of which you have been able to reduce poverty by approximately 1.5% annually, and also sharing some of the initiative the government of Cambodia is taking in terms of diversification to industrial and manufacturing. So thank you very much. Next, may I request Mr. Sudhakar Shukla, who is the Economic Advisor, Department of Rural Development, Ministry of Rural Development, India, to make his presentation, and with a very specific request to please highlight some of the policies that were instrumental in reducing rates of extreme poverty in India, and how will India be able to ensure that no one is left behind in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 agenda. So with this, Mr. Shukla, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies and dignitaries on dais, off dais. I will utilize this 7 minutes window to showcase that what has not worked for India, and as my experience with African development goes, also in African countries, and what changes it requires, and in India what changes we have suggested now, and how it is working. So it's a clear messaging. I don't, because there is a written statement later, but I will try to be highlighting some of the main points associated with tackling poverty in India. As far as theoretical paradigm goes, this neoclassical recipe of invisible hand correcting the growth and equity, balancing those aspects, has not worked. Basically, now evidences are that this whole recipe of invisible hand was unbridled faith on under-examined facts, basically. So this needed a correction to move forward, because growth automatically does not ensure trickle down. So that aspect we have to attack separately along with the growth process. Then we have a good literature on big push theories, breaking the poverty, vicious circle of poverty through investment doses. This again has limitation because the benchmark of the poverty and the standards related to various dignified living change over a period of time. So these static parameters of big push do not help us much after one dose of investment, perhaps through seepages and other problems associated with it, desired results are not achievable. Then we have this income approaches. And here, the major point of departure is that having identified population with certain lesser income group, whatever criteria you suggest, it is always going to be boomerang on you, because those things, if you really study the poverty, the intensity of poverty, it is not the income which is important. It is an important factor, but it is not the only important factor. There are socio-economic issues, psychological, and even behavioral issues associated with poverty. So these various studies in India have shown it conclusively. Until and unless this multifaceted aspect of poverty is addressed conclusively, we will not be able to make dent on poverty. Behavioral aspect, I will give a small example. Like in India, we have launched a big program for constructing toilet across country and making all our country ODF free. Basically, ODF, declaring ODF and constructing toilets themselves do not warrant that people will be using them. So what needed was this communication campaign that if you go to the toilet, you are actually now promoting cleanliness, and your expenditure, out-of-pocket expenditure on health would be going down. So this messaging was very important apart from constructing toilets. So that behavioral change comes through correct messaging. So this aspect also I want to park here when I move forward with other issues. In India, what different we have done recently is that we have mapped each and every individual of the country with respect to deprivation. So if you today ask me how many people below poverty line, I don't know. But I know that these are the people who are deprived at various levels of deprivations, each and everybody. So that kind of census 2011 was conducted, and it is periodically reviewed, and 2021 again a big census will be coming. It is classifying assets for each and every individuals. So now you know that deprivation, when I talk, there are 7 elements of deprivation which have been accounted for. This is like if you are homeless, you are deprived. You are landless, you are deprived. If there is no adult member in the family, then you are considered to be deprived. If there is no literate in your family, then you are considered to be deprived, and so on. So there is 7 deprivation level. Each and every citizen of the country has been marked with these deprivation levels. So to tackle these things, and time is short, I will share my book with the chair, so if ESCAP would be using it for future reference. But the issue is, with this deprivation, our programs have to dovetail in a manner that we have to continuously attack these deprivation levels, so that deprivation goes and the person comes above the poverty line. So this needs housing. We are constructing 30 crore houses. This is 30 million houses to be completed by 2019. We are constructing roads. We are almost completed rural connectivity in entire India. We have given gas connection to all. And see, why these things are being mentioned? Small, small things, water, gas, connection and sanitation are important because half of the population of the country, which is women, they are not part of the workforce. So to bring them to the workforce, you have to relieve them from the duty of collecting firewoods and water for the daily household needs. And this is what we have done. Now we have 50 million women entrepreneurs in rural areas, organized in self-help groups and gainfully employed, self-employed. There is a very marginal contribution from the government. They have the kind of expertise to run the show in the rural areas. Now, I will just say that to back up these whole programs, Government of India has given some statutory backings. One is right to work. 100 days of work to each individual is guaranteed by the Act. So 100 days of work we are giving to each individual. And it is not like you go and dig the well. We have the work program on which these laborers would be employed. And all assets being created under these schemes are geotagged. So anybody can see on our websites that what kind of assets are coming in rural India through this intervention. Then second is right to food, and third is right to education. So this makes the whole policy paradigm to tackle poverty and to eliminate it by 2022, and we are not saying 2030, and we hope that with this kind of robust program in place, we will be able to do it surely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shukla, and also for showcasing some of the things that have worked and some of the things that have not worked in India. Also, in terms of some of the initiatives from Government of India's side to create an enabling environment to address poverty, particularly through statutory requirements like right to work, right to food, and right to education. So thank you very much. The next speaker we have is Mr. August Let, who's the Director General, Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, Vanuatu. I would like to request if you could touch on how will LDC graduation affect the process of poverty reduction and sustainable development of Vanuatu, and also how would you advise other Pacific LDCs on how to prepare for graduation. So with this, Mr. Let you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Vanuatu is deeply honored to be part of this panel. As previously echoed by the Vanuatu's Honorable Minister of Finance in his key address delivered during yesterday's plenary, Vanuatu's process leading to its LDC graduation in 2020 remained challenging, with tremendous division within the Vanuatu's parliament. The division is a result in trying to understand the definition of simple macroeconomic fundamentals, including the per capita income. At the outset, the proportion of Vanuatu population living with higher income is less than those living with just above the internationally recognized poverty line. The theoretical concept and applications of per capita income needed reconsideration and definition, Mr. Moderator. And the reality behind Vanuatu's LDC graduation could lead to even more poverty in the suburban centers or even disadvantaged areas where majority of Vanuatu population lives, particularly in the rural areas. Our infrastructure remains underdeveloped due entirely to the nature and geographical structure and isolation from major markets. Given the limited resources means that infrastructure development is entirely financed by development partners and credit facility. Vanuatu's graduation to LDC means that Vanuatu must be committed to securing a permanent source of income, requiring a deep consideration of its current fiscal regimes. As a country that is ranked one of the most prone to natural disasters in the world, the government is seeking the assistance of members and the international community to lend continuous support and technical assistance both during and after a transition period. Furthermore, the Vanuatu government has sought the assistance of the UN systems, including the ESCAP, for assistance for its transition strategy. In that regard, we look forward to working with the Secretariat in ensuring that we do reach our graduation status, and we commit ourselves for our people's sustainable future, which remain the heartbeat of the 2030 agenda. Now, the second part of the question is to advise other Pacific LDCs on how to prepare for graduation. Mr. Chair, the nature of our country context differs between country to country. Whatever the nature of our country may not be relevant to other small island developing states, but of course, we can ascertain the vulnerability caused by climate change that remain a deterrent to country development. There need to be strong commitment. There need to be strong government policy direction and reforms, especially on inclusive infrastructure development, and that is sustainable. A committed government that works closely with the international development community to drive its sustainable and inclusive agenda going forward would be a necessary condition to realizing its LDC graduation aspiration. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Identified as one of the countries eligible for LDC graduation. It is a national pride and also something we need to be proud of, but sometimes the challenges we face in this transition to LDC makes us think whether we are ready or not, and Bhutan is also one of the countries who's been identified for graduation since March 2015, and so we very much share your sentiments, and we are hopeful that you'll have a successful transition to a developing country from LDC. So thank you very much. The last speaker we have is Mr. Shankar P. Sharma, who is the former Vice Chairman, National Planning Commission of Nepal. And I would like to request Mr. Sharma if you could touch on how can countries ensure macroeconomic stability while pursuing economic growth and poverty reduction. Also, given the limited human and financial resources available in LDCs, how could countries efficiently prioritize poverty reduction and make sure sufficient resources are provided for that purpose? So with this, Mr. Sharma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On those two questions that has been raised to me, I would like to be very brief. First of all, I think we all know, although economic growth is not the most important factor in reducing the poverty, but that is the dominant and primary factor for reducing the poverty for most of the countries. I think there are a number of studies done, but if we see some of the studies which has been done for a number of countries, 80 countries, 100 countries, I think there is, in certain cases, one-to-one relationship in certain strata of the poverty reduction and the economic growth. And not only that, if we see many countries in the medium to longer term, macroeconomic stability has become a very prominent and dominant factor in sustaining the economic growth and reducing the poverty in many countries. although I think the case could be different in different countries. But how do we achieve, and what are the numbers for the macroeconomic stability? Is there any magic number for budget deficit to be determined, or current account deficit, or balance of payment, or exchange rate? I think there are different countries in different time period introducing different indicators and framework. But when we had this Asian financial crisis, and immediately after that, there were a number of seminars and programs like this one. What should be the range of current account deficit and budget deficit? At that time, I think IMF, ESCAP, they gave certain numbers during that period, but that was not the final number anyway. But what people say, what the analysts will say, is that it all depends on country to country. In Nepal, if we see over the last 20 years, we have been very successful in achieving the macroeconomic stability, but there are some problems and some issues related with the economic growth. So some of the things that we have tried, some of the things that we are trying to do in Nepal, which is also equally recommended for other LDCs. As for example, one of the most important issue is the prioritization of the program. I guess this is very essential and this is very important. As for example, most of the countries which are dependent on agriculture, they try to do almost all the kinds of interventions and in all the commodities. But rather than having those all interventions, as for example, if we would like to focus on commercialization of agriculture, if we would like to focus on technology, as for example, the irrigation and high yield varieties, if you would like to focus on high value crops, as for example, in Nepal, high value crops are growing at a rate of 6 to 7% per annum, but its coverage in the total arable land is only 18%. I think there is a great prospect of increasing the land area for high value crops. And similarly, I think if there are anything that needs to be done in the agro-processing and exports, I think that needs to be done serious consideration in terms of intervention. So I think prioritizing the activities among the activities that we are doing in agriculture, I think that is one of the very essential factor for intervention. But as we know, I think agriculture can do wonders for the inclusive growth, but probably not for a longer period of time. If you'd like to increase our income and accelerate the GDP growth rate, then we definitely have to have some kind of investment in the productive areas. When we are talking about the productive areas, I think the transportation, electricity, some of the infrastructure plays a vital role in the country. As for example, especially countries like Nepal, the land transportation, I think is very important. I think that will be the cost of land transportation, including the port facilities in India and the transportation cost that we incur in India and Nepal is close to 25% of the total cost of the imported raw materials in the country. So anything that we can intervene in this area of reducing the transportation cost, electricity, port facilities, I think that will have a major impact in improving the competitiveness in the economy. And also it has been seen that most of the least developed countries and the countries highly dependent on agriculture, agricultural processing and some of the consumer items, I think some of them are could be import substitutions, and some of these are probably will help in the value chain activities for the regional industrial growth and manufacturing growth, will have a very important intervention and also impact to the poverty alleviation and productive job creation. I think we should not be focusing only on the final products these days. Outsourcing activities in the Asia Pacific region is close to 35% these days. I guess the intermediate products and intermediate commodities. So I think that is one of the very essential area where we would like to focus our activities in the value chain sector. Service sector in Nepal, I think although now it accounts for more than 50% of the total GDP, but they are very low productive. I think there are a number of areas where we can increase the value addition. As for example, ICT. This is one of the areas where the value addition is anything between 60 to 70%. It's growing like anything in Nepal, but under the radar, it's not under the radar of the government statistics, because anybody can do these kind of outsourcing activities through the internet by sitting at home and small office. So many of these activities have not been accounted in our national statistics, but there is an informal study done that shows that we export services equivalent to 700 million US dollar, which is really, really very huge, and it's not reflected in the statistics. So that's something that we need to do. And tourism, one of the things, advantage of the tourism, especially in Nepal, is its indirect impact on employment generation is very high. I think, so Nepal is also trying to give emphasis on the tourism activities. I don't want to go into details about the export, because that's also very essential if you'd like to have the growth, but in the meantime, the macroeconomic stability. But now coming back to financing, I would like to be very brief, I think, because the time is very limited. As I said, I think when we identify the priority area, then we need to do the budget reformulation, restructuring of the budgeting. Nepal did this one about 12 years ago. And this is again another time, probably we need to do that. When we did that 12 years ago, 25% of the budget items, budget lines were eliminated. The reason is that we wanted to focus only on the productive activities, and we'd like to eliminate non-productive activities. We also identified the budget into 3 categories: priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. And there were a number of donor-funded projects. We classified them as priority 3. And then there was strong protest from the donor communities, development partners, why their projects were classified as priority 3, and they were supposed to be eliminated after 2 years' time. So I think some of the things probably we need to do is restructuring, streamlining of the budgeting, identifying the priority areas. That is very important. And the second one is anything that is complementary to the private sector investment. I think we should be focusing on that one. I just gave the example of transport sector and electricity. I think there are other areas. I think I don't want to go into details, but anything that is complementary, which can generate and attract more private investment and foreign investment, I think they are very, very important. Elimination of discretionary spending and non-priority spending. And also the improvement in doing business indicators. I think if you'd like to do our intervention and budget allocation in some of these areas, that will not only improve the credibility of the country, but also could help in bringing the more investment. In this context, I think very recently Nepal has done amendment in 3 laws: Special Economic Zone Act. We are trying to establish number of special economic zone in the country, and also Companies Act to simplify the business procedure for the companies and private sector. Industrial enterprise to provide tax and non-tax incentive to the investors, as well as domestic as well as the foreign investors. And also we are trying to, which has not been finalized, Foreign Investment Act after a long period of time, to make doing business and investing in Nepal easier in that context. So there are instruments. I think even the ODA, I think we need to reallocate these ODAs in our priority sector, which are complementary to attract the private sector, as well as in reducing the poverty, but including health and education, because the poverty is not only income poverty, but also the multi-dimensional factor of that one. I think just to give you one example, I think where we need to improve, 13% of our budget today goes to the targeted programs in the area of poverty alleviation, which I think is closer to 4% of GDP, which I think is a very, very high number. But if we streamline some of these activities, we can have more benefit out of the small amount of resources that we put in the budget, national budget. And finally, I guess the implementation is an issue in most of the countries. The cost overrun, time overrun, initiating the projects without doing the feasibility study, weak monitoring and procurement system. I think these are some of the areas where we need to continuously improve. I think most of the countries are improving on it, but we need to be vigilant about these things and continuously improving upon these factors. So I think these are some of the tips, but as our other speakers were saying, these are all country-specific, and then we have to have the tailor-made intervention in these areas. The tax, Nepal has been very successful in using this value-added tax, which is consumption-based tax. And then we have, in South Asia, the revenue GDP ratio has become the highest in South Asia in Nepal. I think I would like to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma, and also thank you for, again, emphasizing on the need to prioritize on what we do. Also, the emphasis on infrastructure, particularly for landlocked, least developed countries, the importance of value chain, and then some of the initiatives in terms of budget reforms. Again, to focus more on the productive priority sector. So thank you very much, Ms. Sharma. So with this, we come to the end of this session, and I would like to thank our eminent panelists for having shared their valuable perspective. We will go back to our reserved chairs, and may I request Madam Chair of the committee to take over the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I keep this?
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Thinley Namgyal, Secretary, Gross National Happiness Commission of Bhutan, for moderating the panel along with our distinguished panelists. So now I would like to open the floor for statements from the delegates. We have about 33 minutes for this. And as mentioned before, the statements will be read in the order with which they have been received by the conference officer. And I would like to urge all speakers to maintain the discipline of time allocation. And they will be, the order of speaking will be as follows as before. First, the statements from the members, then the associate members, permanent observers, followed by statements from designated representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies and intergovernmental organizations, and followed by statements from representatives of NGOs as time permits. So, may I now call on the distinguished delegate from India. You have the floor, sir.
We have made some intervention as a part of the panel, and also we have submitted a written statement. So in the interest of time, I am giving few messages and leaving the statement with the Secretariat. So, Government of India not only extends unequal support to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, more importantly, it is striving hard for realization of various SDGs well before stipulated timelines associated with SDGs. Government of India, under astute leadership of Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, has committed towards the goal of poverty quit India 2022. We are confident with action plan which is already in place, implementation stage, and it is at the implementation stage, we will be able to achieve target of goal 1 of the SDG well before the deadline 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from India. I now would like to call on the distinguished delegate of Bhutan. You have the floor, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Bhutan has made good progress in terms of poverty reduction. From a high of about more than 30% in 2003, our poverty rate as of 2012 is around 12%. Currently we are implementing our 11th five-year plan, which started from July 2013 and will conclude next year, June 2018. And our target for this current five-year plan is to bring it down further to 5%. Also, what we have noticed is, probably like in many other countries, poverty is mainly a rural phenomenon, with almost about 16.7% of rural poverty compared to 1.8% in urban areas. So while, because the numbers are getting smaller, and while efforts to bring poverty down through broad-based programs are being pursued, we also have what we call targeted poverty intervention programs. And this is being done mainly to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind in terms of. So currently we have about 3 such programs. The first being National Rehabilitation Program. This is basically providing land to the landless or functionally landless. So land is given together with skills, agriculture input support to help them improve their livelihood. The second program we have is Rural Economic Advancement Program, and this is targeted at village level. So the poorest villages are identified based on a multidimensional poverty criteria. So health, education, living standard, food security, besides that, what we call community vitality. So it's based on those 6 indicators. And so again, ensuring that these people have sustainable livelihood. Now, these 2 programs are ongoing and initiated quite recently. But what we have also found is that, especially with intervention at village level, there are non-poor villages, but there are poor people. And these people were being left out. And also there are, in the poor village, there are non-poor also. They were benefiting. So now next what we are doing is moving on to target what we call the targeted poverty household intervention. So this is again based on a criteria, multidimensional criteria, and targeted at household level. So then the other initiatives that we are pursuing to ensure poverty reduction is in terms of, again, we have, for all new policies, that we come up, we put it through what we call, again, GNH policy screening tool. And health, education, and living standard are some of the indicators based on which a policy is judged to see whether it's GNH favorable or not. So just to ensure, again, the multidimensional aspect of poverty reduction is ensured. Besides that, the other intervention that we have put in place is in terms of allocation of resources to local governments. So local governments are provided resource based on 4 criteria, with the highest weight being given to poverty, which is about 45%. Rest is for population, geographical area, and the transportation cost index. So these are some of the initiatives that I thought I would like to, wanted to share with this distinguished delegates. Of course, while efforts are being made to ensure that interventions, policies are put in place to address poverty, but in terms of capacity, we are still constrained. So in this regard, from the Royal Government of Bhutan, our request would be to ESCAP if support in terms of capacity strengthening, particularly in the area of macroeconomic analysis. Also, the other area that we have concern is in terms of data management. Data is a serious constraint. So our request is if ESCAP could consider extending support in this area to help us, again, make sure that no one is left behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate of Bhutan. So as with India, you have an action plan to implement the SDGs. And as always, you provide us a good example of how to do multi-criteria targeting. Thank you very much. May I now call the distinguished representative from the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a recurring concern related to increasing globalization as experienced by the Philippines is its impact on poverty alleviation. And preliminary estimates show that an increase in trade openness contributes to reduction in income inequality in the Philippines. Poverty reduction will therefore likely continue as the Philippines' growth outlook remains positive and inclusive growth policies are pursued. Using, for example, the World Bank's International Poverty Line, which is equivalent to $3.20 a day, US dollars, in purchasing power parity terms, the poverty rate for the Philippines is estimated to have dropped from 27% in 2015 to 24.2% in 2017, implying that around 1 million Filipinos exited poverty each year since 2015. The projection is based on the Philippines' growth forecast under the assumption that the responsiveness of the poverty rate to economic growth follows the observed historical average. As economic growth remains robust, the poverty rate is projected to decline further to 22.9% in 2018. Now, as a support to poverty reduction, we have also been deeply involved in initiatives that promote financial inclusion to ensure that appropriate financial products and services are accessible to a great majority of the population. Regulatory efforts are centered on establishing a supportive policy environment that recognizes the deeply ingrained barriers to financial access, including cost, geography, information asymmetry, and lack of infrastructure, among others, and enables market-based solutions and innovations to address market frictions. These efforts have paved the way for widening the range of products and services, expanding physical and virtual reach, liberalizing consumer onboarding, and establishing a framework for consumer protection. For example, in 2008, the Central Bank developed the Credit Surety Fund program. With the support of this program, the Central Bank is able to help medium and small-scale industries to grow their businesses. The BSP, the Philippine Central Bank, has likewise allowed the establishment of micro-banking offices in 2010 to increase outreach in areas that are unbanked. The number of operating micro-banking offices has increased from 251 in 2011 to 691 in 2016. The BSP has also promoted the offering of a wide range of microfinance products, such as microfinance loans, micro-agricultural loans, microfinance housing loans, micro-deposits, and micro-insurance. As of end December 2016, there were 168 banks with microfinance operations serving more than 1.6 million clients, with a total loan portfolio amounting to 13.7 billion pesos. In 2013, the BSP allowed non-bank agents such as pawn shops, grocery stores, drug stores to perform electronic money or e-money transactions such as remittances and payments. Promoting the use of technology such as mobile banking and the use of e-money expands the reach of financial institutions to unserved and underserved areas. These facilitate fund transfers and therefore help further the growth of financial inclusion. As of end December 2016, there were more than 26,000 e-money agents in the country, representing a 195% growth from end December of 2010. And in July of 2015, the National Financial Inclusion Strategy was launched. Finally, with the goal of developing a seamless payments and settlements highway, we have launched the National Retail Payment System also in 2015, and this lowers the cost of payments transactions, thereby making them more accessible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from the Philippines, for highlighting the importance of financial inclusion as a major strategy for poverty reduction. Indeed, we know that economic growth actually directly benefits those who are able to participate in the market. And sometimes lack of access to finance is really the one thing that constrains the participation to the market, in the market, of especially those in areas where poverty is very high, particularly in the rural areas. May I now call on the distinguished delegate from Nepal.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my delegation, I would like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks to ESCAP for inviting and providing this opportunity to make a statement in this very important meeting. Madam Chair, there has been a significant progress towards the poverty alleviation as a result of the several efforts since last decade, 6 decades. Nepal experienced a sharp decline in poverty, about average 1% point per annum in the last 2 decades. Certain public intervention on poverty reduction, improvement on employment and wage rates in rural area, rapid urbanization and remittance inflow are found as major factors of this remarkable progress. However, 1/5 of the population are still below the national poverty line, and severe prevalence of poverty exists among the certain social groups and strata of society. There is still a huge gap between rural and urban and several geographical regions and social groups. The intensity of the poverty is relatively higher, especially among the women, indigenous people, minorities, vulnerable communities in remote rural areas. The distribution of poverty not only in geographical level, but also inequalities seen in the basis of differences of nationalities as well. Madam Chair, besides that, the opportunity has been created to identify the elevated poverty through cooperation and coordination among the program run by the various sector, which can mobilize the huge amount of resources in the sector for prosperity of the poor household. Increased enrollment and literacy attribute sharp reduction of intergenerational poverty. Inclusive government system aim to correct the structural causes of poverty such as gender, caste, ethnicity, and geography. The prospects for enormous utilization of water resource, potentials for access to equity in hydroelectricity and assets accumulation, particularly in local level, and thus the long-term source of income. Meanwhile, the rapid urbanization has opened a window for engagement in the various service sector. With the beginning of the identification of the poor households and giving them identity cards, there will be an opportunity for taking the poor's targeted program ahead. However, poverty caused by the low growth economic development that was further dented by the devastating earthquake in 2015 and disruption in the supply situation last fiscal year and heavy flood occurred this year are all the major challenges we have. In addition to that, reducing the invisible employment prevalent in the informal sector and creating a new employment opportunities in productive sectors are other challenges in this regards. So it would be instrumental if ESCAP can make some rigorous analytical studies and some country-specific research work with the harmonization of UN and other development partners, and some capacity building works on the policies, strategies, and possible alternative programs for poverty reduction in our context, and make some recommendation for reducing poverty and inequality in the region. Again, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Nepal. May I now call on the distinguished delegate from China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. I will deliver my statement by Chinese. Thank you. 主席女士，消除一切形式的极端贫困是2030年可持续发展议程的首要目标。各国应加大投入，国际社会应加强合作，发达国家应增加发展援助，确保该目标的实现。中国于2014年完成了全国统一的贫困村、贫困户、贫困人口的扶贫信息管理系统，并正在以此为基础，因人因地施策，因贫因原因施策，因贫困类型施策，形成了政府、企业、民间社团共同参与、协同行动、精准帮扶、靶向脱贫的格局和声势。过去5年，中国减少农村贫困人口6000多万，贫困发生率从2012年的10.2%下降至2016年底的4.5%。到2020年，中国绝对贫困问题有望得到历史性解决，将提前10年实现联合国2030年可持续发展议程确定的减贫目标。谢谢主席女士。
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of China. Indeed, thank you once again for bringing up SDG 17, which is very important for achieving all the other SDGs. So may I now call the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. You have the floor, sir.
Madam Chair and distinguished participants, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to everyone. Already yesterday I have mentioned about the economic development of Bangladesh, and today I will give you an overview about the initiatives that Bangladesh taken just to end poverty. Government of Bangladesh recognizes the multidimensional nature of poverty and the need to address the problem by adopting appropriate policies and strategies. And development policies and strategies mainly center on the overreaching goal of achieving pro-poor growth. And the economy enjoyed annual growth rate persistently around 6.5% during the last 8 years. Bangladesh believes that building disaster resilience is critical for eradicating extreme poverty. And with a view to achieving this goal, Bangladesh is able to interlink the Sendai framework proposes with his national poverty reduction strategy. And the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, for the first time, has formulated a comprehensive national social security strategies to consolidate all safety net programs to support its citizens who need it most. And the coverage of social safety net recipients is now 27.80%, and the allocation has been increased from 1.9% to 2.9% of the total GDP. And another important policy that government initiated, the greater allocation for annual development program, and under this program, the local government institutions, those are located in the rural areas, are implementing various projects that are targeted to create employment opportunities for the rural poor. Government believes that the faster growth is a necessary precondition for alleviating poverty. And the 7th five-year plan that ensures that complementary strategies and policies are in place to make the growth path inclusive, responsive, and adaptable to the ongoing transformation. And we are also ensuring that the growth is sustainable and resilient to climate change. The Central Bank of Bangladesh had been playing a pivotal role in offering banking facilities to millions who did not have access to formal financial services. Such initiatives includes introducing mobile financial services, requiring banks to open 15% of their branches in rural areas, and starting agent banking. Farmers now can open bank account with only 10 taka deposits that has allowed them access to different financial benefits offered by the government. Women entrepreneurs, particularly those are in the rural areas, can now borrow loans with single-digit interest rate. Microfinance, particularly governed by the NGOs, institutions, also have substantial impact on the financial inclusion, as more than 90% of their clients are female. But Bangladesh still faces lots of challenges. Poverty reduction is a comprehensive issue and thereby requires a whole of government approach to address it. And according to this, mapping of ministries for various SDGs targets, particularly for implementing the SDG 1 goal, 44 ministries and divisions are involved in addressing that goal. And effective coordination is very essential. We are facing that challenge. Resource mobilization, particularly from external source, remains a big challenge for the government to implement SDG 1 side by side other goals of the SDG. The National Security Strategy aims at ensuring adequate resources for providing decent living of vulnerable and marginalized segment of the society. The strategy is inherently inclusive and requires consolidated and streamlined efforts for implementation. Bangladesh needs capacity building of its national statistical organization for tracking the progress of SDG 1. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world in the face of adverse impacts of climate change. We are facing frequent floods, droughts, cyclones, and other natural disasters, and very frequently we are facing some man-made disasters also that make implementation of SDG 1 greatly challenging, particularly in the coastal areas. Under these circumstances, the delegation recommends that some sort of analytical work in poverty reduction policies and strategies in a holistic manner by identifying as appropriate within a country-specific context is very much necessary. And our request is to ESCAP just to strengthen its support for improving the technical capacities for the understanding of policy issues to address the poverty, including multidimensional aspects, by conducting cooperation among the member states through various workshops, studies, scientific inclusions. Thank you, Madam, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Bangladesh and its initiatives just to end the greater poverty. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. May I now call on the distinguished representative from Maldives.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I take this opportunity to share the Maldives' experience about poverty reduction and sustainable development. And I would just like to share with you the importance of sustainability and with respect to GDP growth and GDP with experience of the 2004 tsunami, which destroyed more than a quarter, more than half of our GDP, within a very short period of time. And this was the time when Maldives had almost reduced its poverty rate to less than 5%, something like that. And the next day morning when we woke up, of course, the poverty rate was very high, and we had to start all over again. So the lessons of experience that we have had was the importance of the sustainable macroeconomy, very healthy, international reserves is equally important, particularly in view of the declining foreign assistance. So the best place to find a helping hand is at the end of your own arm, which means sustainability of your economy. So I keep on saying there's nothing more important than your own resources and to bridge the gap and to ensure that poverty is maintained low for the foreseeable future. But with that, the other reason why I took this opportunity for the intervention is, again, I would like to support most of the colleagues in suggesting and recommending the role of ESCAP in following through ensuring the sustainable development agenda, poverty reduction is ensured. I think from my experience, again, like I said yesterday, we need a lot more coordination between the multilaterals and ESCAP, particularly focusing on the multidimensional aspects and picking up specific areas of intervention. And I would also like to support the national workshop approach that ESCAP can conduct and identify specific areas of intervention and integrate it into the national development plan so that efficiently that this can be done. Invariably, what happens with the multilaterals and national governments is that we have so few resources, particularly Maldives, for example. We have very few resources, government manpower, and unless we can plan these things very well, we find that resources are so thinly stretched, and the outputs, therefore, are not necessarily guaranteed. So if we can plan the work ahead and integrate it into our national budgets and integrate it into your action plans and programs and calendars, I think the output is then assured and guaranteed. So finally, I would also, like to support the rest of the colleagues in suggesting that ESCAP should conduct workshops at national levels and interventions at national levels in addition to these, periodic gatherings here in ESCAP and other regional areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished representative from Maldives. So this is something for the ESCAP to think about. I really I support your suggestion that really the point to intervene is at the planning stage, so that whatever it is that you will be proposing in terms of interventions, it will really be integrated in our national plans. May I now call on the distinguished representative from Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the time of restoration our independence in 2002, Timor-Leste developed a national vision called Timor-Leste 2020, Our Nation, Our Future. This document provides the framework within which the 2002 National Development Plan was drafted. This plan focused on poverty alleviation, basic needs, the consolidation of security and stability, and capacity building for the basic institution of the state. In 2010, a broad national consultation process was initiated to formulate the country's next development plan. Extensive consultations were held at the local level throughout the country, with the direct involvement of the government's senior leadership. The outcome of this process was the Timor-Leste Strategy Development Plan 2011 and 2013 SDP. Timor-Leste Strategy Development Plan 2011-2013 SDP is an integrated package of policy aligned with global goals such as MDG and SDGs, designed to be delivered in 3 phases. Short-term 1 until 5 years, medium-term 5 until 10 years, and long-term 10 until 20 years. It was developed between 2010 and 2011 and submitted to the Timor-Leste Parliament for approval on 7 July 2011. The SDP covers 3 case areas: social capital, infrastructure development, and economy development. Underlying these are strategies for creating an effective institutional framework and a strong macroeconomic foundation. The recently completed 2014 and 2015 Timor-Leste Survey of Living Standards show a significant reduction in poverty in the country over the past decade, with the proportion of Timor-Leste living in poverty declining from 15.4% in 2007 to 41.8% in 2014. Based on the national poverty line, this poverty estimate provides the most accurate measure of poverty in Timor-Leste, given local conditions, but is not directly comparable with poverty rates in other countries. Based on the internationally comparable measure of extreme poverty, poverty in Timor-Leste has fallen from 47.2% in 2007 to 13.3% in 2014. Ultimately, we want to eliminate poverty, strengthen the basis of our economy, and consist in harmony with our environment. Achieving all the goals will necessarily result in poverty elimination. Goal 1, achieving the goals will also ensure peace and stability, creating a positive feedback that will strengthen the foundation of our development. Education and good health leads to a productive workforce, stronger institutions, and economic growth, which reduce the risk of conflict and instability, creating the condition for further improvement in human development, economic development, and so on. Ultimately, we have a well-educated and healthy population. When we have strong economic foundation and growth, we will be more effective in our measures to protect our environment and arrest climate change trend. However, this does not mean that we will wait until that day in the distant period to focus on other goals. On the goals for our planet, this is the plan for government, the joint effort between the whole of government. Individually, each of our line ministers also have their own priorities aligning with the SDGs. Then again, as we are currently looking into revising our SDP...
May I request you to conclude, please?
Yes. In 2017, combined source of the state budget total 1.5 billion. Government of Timor-Leste prioritized implementing goals on eradicating hunger, improve nutrition, increase agricultural production, continue investing in the quality of education, and improve infrastructure and industry, and relate to the Goals 1, poverty elimination. Timor-Leste believes that peace and stability are the precursors for sustainable development. There is not development without peace. Stability may be an obstacle for poverty reduction. May I humbly call your consideration on this element as one of the shared vulnerability and risk. To conclude, Timor-Leste delegation like to bring some of points for consideration as follows. 1, recommend to have analytical work in poverty reduction, policy and strategies in a holistic manner by identifying as appropriate with the country-specific context related to the LDCs. And 2, request strength in the support for the improving technical capacities for the understanding of policy issues to address the poverty, including multidimensional aspects by conducting national workshops in the country. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We're actually running a bit late, and we have 4 more countries here who wish to deliver their statements. May I request each country delegate to please keep to the time, and if you can limit your intervention to only 3-4 minutes. May I now request the distinguished delegate from Vietnam.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor to make the official statement on behalf of Vietnam, and my sincere congratulations for your chairwomanship of the Committee on Macroeconomic Policies. First, Vietnam recognized the importance of the topic of poverty reduction and financing for development within the umbrella of the Committee on Macroeconomic Policies. As I mentioned in the yesterday afternoon panel discussion, Vietnam has a great achievement in poverty reduction for the last 3 decades. Before 1986, more than 20% of the population is below the poverty line defined by the UN. After 30 years of continuous economic reform, the poverty rate now is less than 5%. And from 2009, Vietnam reached the middle income nation. From Vietnam experience, this success of poverty reduction relies on the importance of economic growth fueled by foreign domestic investment and the government commitment to restructure its own budget to mobilize domestic and sustainable resources, spending for infrastructure and social welfare more efficiently. First, taking this opportunity, I would like to recommend the committee and the Secretariat of the UN ESCAP to continue analytical research on poverty reductions, policy and strategies by different members to identify as necessary within the country's specific context. And Vietnam would be a useful practical lesson for the poverty reductions. Second, like other countries have made the statement before, Vietnam requests the committee and secretariat to strengthen its support for building technical capacity for member concerned to understand the policy issue to address the poverty, including multi-dimensional aspect, by conducting national workshops and studies. Along this process, Vietnam continues to commit to participate actively and share any valuable experience if needed in the international cooperation context within the UN's activities. And I would like to thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Vietnam. May I now call the distinguished delegate from Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, poverty reduction in this region, especially in countries with special needs, is very important. Of course, there remains challenges, but we're happy to listen the progress from many delegations today. This is minor comment, but I would like to make a comment on the use of common but differentiated responsibilities in the document prepared by the Secretariat. This word is not specifically for the context of international support to the countries with special needs. Therefore, we would like to ask the Secretariat to use this word appropriately and carefully in the future in order to avoid unnecessary misunderstanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the Secretariat has taken note of that. May I now call the distinguished delegate from Afghanistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My country, Afghanistan, is a landlocked country. At the same time, it is one of the LDCs. Its problems in security and safety are also added problems to the existing barriers to sustainable development. Therefore, without some special considerations, it's not possible to do sustainable development and graduation from the LDC. And a number of the interventions I think are very important, and I believe ESCAP may be very helpful. For example, regional connectivity in water, electricity, telecommunication, public health, in some cases water management among the South Asian and also Central Asian countries are benefiting each country. And ESCAP may play a very critical role in communication and coordination for effective and efficient regional connectivity. The second is about the structural changes and transformation in the health disease. For example, in Afghanistan, the public financial management or the public procurement is such that the public institutions are not able to execute around 50 or 60% of the annual budget. At the same time, the private sector is also in such positions that they are not able to execute the projects that they receive through the public procurement. And their involvement in the development is so low. My recommendation is that if ESCAP undertakes some analytical work at the regional level and to share the successful experience and at the same time the failed ones, that what works and what does not work, that will be very crucial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Afghanistan. Still another aspect of governance, the issue of absorptive capacity in both the public and private sector. May I now call the distinguished delegate from Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Madam Chair, His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Sri Lanka now has a poverty headcount ratio of 6.7%, and that's from 2013 survey, which is compared with the 28.8% in 1995. So you can see there's a drastic reduction in poverty headcount in the country. Meanwhile, our per capita income has also increased by almost threefold during a span of just 12 years to US dollars 3,835 in last year. And we expect it will further go up to US dollars 5,000 by 2025. Let me speak a few factors that actually have facilitated this success story of the country. Firstly, we've seen a gradual structural transformation in the economy. So since 2002, the annual growth of the industrial sector has consistently outpaced that of both agricultural and the services sectors, thus creating opportunities for the labor market to increase its wage levels, which in turn results in the improvement of their livelihoods. Secondly, I would say the urbanization and agglomeration have resulted in the country being able to create a dynamic economic corridor without necessarily creating the mass migration of labor from rural to urban areas, given that the infrastructure development, especially roads and transport, has been fairly equitable, with electricity coverage from the national grid reaching almost 100% by last year, as opposed to around 60% in 2005. Meanwhile, the access to safe drinking water has reached almost 90% by last year. And at the same time, the privatization of the state telecom player and the advent of many private sector investments into the sector, with the mobile phone disseminating quite well, the rural-urban connectivity was better facilitated. In Sri Lanka since 1945, we've had free education and free universal health care. Both these have had a significant impact in creating a health and an educated workforce. In fact, Sri Lanka's health sector is considered to be one of the best in the Asia, in spite that the health expenditure from the government being just around 1.6 of GDP. Our school enrollment is at 95.9%, which is high by many standards, and there are no gender disparities in the country. So our own open economic policies have been complemented by a strong social safety network, with two key programs being implemented in the last 3 decades, including Janasavya and Samurdhi. So both these programs have resulted in transfers to low-income households supplemented by livelihood or skills development mechanisms. We are now in the process of actually revamping our social safety networks to make them more targeted and broad-based to cover loss of employment, etc. Madam Speaker, Sri Lanka being in the tropical zone is faced now with high-frequency, relatively low-impact natural disasters, and the country has implemented many mechanisms to face this issue, which includes the natural disaster insurance cover for the entire country. Madam Chair, today Sri Lanka is faced with the different challenges that is associated with a middle-income country. Such challenges include increasing incidence of non-communicable diseases in the health sector, the demand for a workforce with more skills in the technologies of tomorrow, and the need for a more robust governance mechanism that allows greater participation of the citizen in the decision-making process. Hence, we are in the process of addressing such challenges with the fiscal stability leading the way, complemented by a conducive environment for the private sector to operate. So in this context, Madam Chair, we would like the ESCAP to engage in more studies that focus on the issues of the new poverty profiles that middle-income countries face, so that countries such as Sri Lanka will be able to design its policies in a more effective manner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Sri Lanka. And so we now conclude the deliberations on agenda item 3A and proceed to considering agenda item 3B, supporting sustainable development in the Asia-Pacific, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, as referred to in document number E/ESCAP/CMPF1/3. May now invite the Secretariat to introduce agenda item, to be followed by a high-level panel discussion. And again, after the presentation, the floor will be open to another round of statements from the delegation. Secretariat, please.
Madam Chair, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce under agenda item 3 the session on agenda item 3B, supporting sustainable development in Asia-Pacific, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. The objectives of the session are to invite the committee to discuss and deliberate on the contents of the Secretariat Note E/ESCAP/CMPF1/3, and to seek guidance from the committee on how the Secretariat can continue to support the countries with special needs in meeting the objectives of their relevant global programs of action and support their sustainable development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Asia-Pacific countries with special needs face various challenges, often dependent on their developmental status, location, and size of their economies. The 12 least developed countries' predicament is their level of development. Most, however, have made good progress in implementing the Istanbul Programme of Action and improving their prospects for timely graduation from the LDC category. Progress has been made in reducing poverty, strengthening productive capacities, promoting agricultural development, increasing exports, investing in human resources, and mobilizing financial resources. Indeed, we expect that 10 of the region's LDCs will meet the criteria for graduation at the 2018 triennial review of the Committee for Development Policy. As far as the 12 landlocked countries are concerned, these continue to face internal and external factors that constrain their ability to overcome their development challenges related to the priority areas listed in the Vienna Programme of Action. These factors include slow progress to diversify export products, a lack in infrastructure and FDI, as well as weak prospects for global trade and volatile commodity prices. Economic growth in most of them has remained tepid. The 21 small island developing states also continue to face major challenges associated to their small size and remoteness from major markets, which are compounded by the challenges of climate change. They continue to face structural bottlenecks that impede the development of productive capacities. On their own, they are unable to tackle the challenges, in particular those related to climate change and the rising of sea levels. In view of these predicaments, it is important that we assist countries with special needs in their fostering of structural transformation through infrastructure development and building productive capacities, in strengthening their capacities for accessing and leveraging international financial resources, and in increasing financial inclusion and mobilizing domestic resources. It is important that we provide support to graduation from the LDC category during the transition of graduation and in their post-graduation period. The ability to implement the relevant programs of action and to attain sustainable development goals, as well as to continue to develop in a sustainable manner despite internal and external challenges, depends critically upon the availability of adequate domestic policy-orientated capacities. One of the most important development-related tasks for the international community and ESCAP is therefore the facilitation of capacity building. ESCAP is acutely aware of this and has provided to countries with special needs training and organized capacity building workshops related to the adaptation of national policy frameworks into the 2030 Agenda, infrastructure development financing, and regional economic cooperation and integration. Policy dialogues were facilitated to disseminate research findings, to build capacities with respect to understand how to address some of the economic challenges that countries in the region face. ESCAP has supported the development of Asia-Pacific least developed countries and landlocked developing countries by focusing on their progress in implementing their respective regional programs of action and on regional economic cooperation and integration, especially closer integration with ASEAN members, to overall bridge development gaps. ESCAP has supported the LDC graduation process by focusing on how transition would impact the country's development. In conclusion, I hope that our discussion today will provide more guidance to the Secretariat and Member States on the issues raised and provide guidance on further work to supporting the sustainable development of countries with special needs. I thank you.
Thank you once again to Mr. Oliver Paddison, Chief, Countries with the Special Needs Section, Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, for introducing to us Agenda Item 3B. Now I would like to ask the panelists to take their seats here at the rostrum, and I also would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Jalil, Senior Advisor to the Minister, Ministry of Finance and Treasury, and former Minister of Finance and Treasury, Maldives, to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will now have a discussion on the topic of supporting sustainable development in Asia Pacific, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. I would now like to introduce the distinguished panelists that will speak at the panel. I am delighted to have with us Dr. Kazi Anwarul Haq, Additional Secretary, Economic Relations Division, Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh. Mr. Komraj Koirala, Joint Secretary, forgive me if I pronounce your names not accurately, Joint Secretary, National Planning Commission Secretariat, Kathmandu, Mr. Lai Tui Siliva, Assistant Chief Executive Officer, Finance Sector, Ministry of Finance, Samoa, and Mr. Rajiv Biswas, Asia Pacific Chief Economist, IHS Market, Singapore. To allow sufficient time for discussion and to take account that we have 4 speakers, I would like to kindly request all the speakers if they could strictly limit their remarks to no more than 7 minutes. I would like now to invite Dr. Kazi, Additional Secretary, Economic Relations Division, Ministry of Finance from Bangladesh, to make a presentation which may be useful for our deliberations under Agenda Item 3B. The government of Bangladesh is demonstrating a strong political will for the country to graduate from the category of LDCs and has made significant development progress in recent years, such that it is highly likely to meet the criteria for graduation at the 2018 triennial review of the Committee for Development Policy. I am sure the audience would like to hear about the prospects that Bangladesh sees post-graduation and to learn more about the elements of successful transition strategy. Mr. Kazi Anwar al-Haq, welcome.
Honorable Chair, eminent panelists, and distinguished participants, good morning. So it's a privilege for me to give you an overview about Bangladesh and its transition from least developed countries. Referring to the questions already provided to me, I will give an emphasis on particularly the urbanization problem that we are facing. It's a great happiness for me to announce that Bangladesh already has achieved the graduation threshold in 3 indicators, that is GNI, asset indicators, and vulnerable indicators. So it's a good thing. Already you have mentioned our economic development scenario and also the government steps to achieve SDGs. All these are very much relevant to Istanbul Plan of Action. The relationship between the urbanization and economic development has long been a popular issue of debate, particularly the countries who are going to graduate from LDC. It's very important for them. And the question is, should a development country encourage urbanization? While this is a real dilemma, particularly in case of Bangladesh, because of a highly unfavorable land population balance, the only alternative Bangladesh now to urbanization is urbanization. The question is not whether Bangladesh should urbanize. The question is how Bangladesh will handle the challenges of urbanization. No matter what the path of economic modalities a country is followed, urbanization has been inevitable consequence across the world. And already half of the world's population is urban. And currently in Asia and Africa are the best urbanized regions, but they are expected, they reach their respected tipping points. That is when their urban population will exceed the rural population. Bangladesh is also not beyond this. Cities in Bangladesh are faced with the challenges of rapid population, increase characterized by crises such as lack of economic dynamism, governance failure, severe infrastructure and service deficiencies, inadequate land administration, massive slums, and social breakdown. These are the challenges of Bangladesh at present, particularly in the event of graduation to LDCs. However, urban centers continue to grow, and despite the severity of these obstacles, as a result, urban areas in Bangladesh have exceptionally high population density, but relatively low economic density. High population combined with rapid urbanization implies a large and fast-growing urban population to manage. And now in Dhaka city, the largest urban conurbation in Bangladesh, in one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world. However, the economic density of Bangladesh urban areas or value added per square kilometer is relatively low for an international perspective. Economic activity is concentrated in Dhaka and Chittagong, the big city of Bangladesh, and about 9% of Bangladesh population lives in Dhaka, and which contributes 36% of the total GDP. An additional 11% of Bangladesh GDP is generated by Chittagong, the two cities, 36 and 11. And the economic gap between Dhaka and Chittagong compared to other medium and small-sized cities are large and widening. Bangladesh needs to build an urban space that is capable of innovating, is better connected, and more livable in order to make cities competitive. Bangladesh urban space is falling being all the three of these drivers of competitiveness. In spite of that, government has taken various steps for developing the skilled human resources and innovation capacity by implementing ICT policy in every spheres of people's life. Dhaka metro area also needs to be better connected internally and with its pre-urban areas. And both Dhaka and Chittagong have to be strengthened their connection to the global economy. Improved connectivity within Bangladesh systems of cities is also important for productivity and effort competitiveness. The development of economically dynamic urban space, in particular in the Dhaka metro region, has occurred at the expense of livability. The livability of the urban space will become an even more binding constraint to sustain growth as Bangladesh transitions to the LDCs. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, participants.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to note, the significant development progress that you have made towards graduation, and we hope that you'll be able to meet the challenges of urbanization, including with respect to infrastructure, land administration, and making those cities livable in a short period of time. With that, I would now like to invite Mr. Komraj Koirala, Joint Secretary of National Planning Commission, Secretary Kathmandu, to make your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for providing this opportunity to share my opinion in this very important panel discussion. As we embark on turning the transformative sustainable development goals into the reality, we must focus on the actions to make the qualitative differences of the lives of our people. The SDGs are not mutually exclusive. To address the key development challenges, we policymakers should identify interrelationship and synergies between the 17 goals and 169 targets. For instance, in Nepal, the degree to which the absolute poverty is reduced will depend upon the progress made on physical infrastructure, that is Goal 9 in SDG, and which is still great hindrance for the sustainable graduation of the nation. Again, healthy lives will to have a certain extent to link the agriculture productivity, that is Goal 2, and food security. Goal 2 may have the connection with the education, that is Goal 4. While competing the secondary education may help the goal benefit from array of social economic returns such as empowerment, that is Goal 5, higher productivity and jobs. These benefits in turn are likely to have better and deeper connections with young child's health in Nepal. Similarly, the promotion of renewable energy that in Goal 7 in the other hands may have the positive impacts in well-being of the rural households in Nepal. For this, installing a strong monitoring system with a credible database is crucial to measure the incentives progress across the SDGs under our Central Bureau of Statistics, which is under a National Planning Commission. This is all interaction needs to be considered in the context of LDCs and LLDCs. In March 2015, the United Nations Committee for Development Policy noted that the Nepal had already met two criteria, that HAI and vulnerability, of 3 thresholds for the graduation. However, progress was disrupted with the devastating earthquake in 2015. The third of the population was impacted and 3% were pushed under the poverty line at that time. Also, the post-flood recovery needs assessment estimates about 70 billion Nepalese currency additional resources to recovery from the heavy flood occurrence in the southern part of the country this year. The restructuring of the state into the federal structure system, this demands the huge resources in the future. So, though Nepal qualified the 2 criteria in 2015, but still too far from the income criteria. We aspire to graduate by 2022. The government is working on assessment on the next triennial review that is going to occur in early next year. The criteria are much focused on vulnerability rather than the income criteria. Somehow they are not much interlinked each other sometime. And to foster the private sector interest in sustainable growth for LDC graduation, the country must promote the common will between the public-private sectors and public and third sector to produce the tangible outputs by enhancing the public-private partnership and viability gap funding mechanism. Also, regional economic cooperation and integration is another vital issue for sustainable graduation of the country. While chairing the RESI meeting last week, the Vice Chair of the National Planning Commission has also highlighted the issue for better economic cooperation and integration in sustainable development in the region. For this, fostering the seamless connectivity is crucial in this region. The graduation experiences to date suggest several lessons for Nepal. However, successful and sustainable graduation hinges most on the income threshold, least on the EBI vulnerability threshold. No country has done so without crossing this income threshold. Nepal is being the only case in this context. Being LDC and LLDC, there are some issues I think pertinent in today. The focusing beyond the redistribution towards the broad-based expansion of the economic prosperity will be the biggest challenge for the sustainable development. The graduation is only one is the technical issue, but we have to achieve the status of middle income target ultimately. Graduation also not only the government issue, it's also a private sector and other stakeholders should aware about this. The private sector has not been able to benefit from concessional and the foreign direct investment window much in our context. The being LDC and LLDCs are vulnerable not only in economic shocks, crisis, but also the natural disaster like earthquake we have 2015 and frequent catastrophic related to weather. And being LDCs, we have to work on facilitation on trade and transit issue, on reducing the cost of transport and doing business. Hence, graduation should be the integral part of the development strategy in our context, and we are trying to address the issues. Overall, the scale of issues and challenges in Nepal confronts the demand of extraordinary commitments from stakeholders at all levels. The 2030 Agenda has shown the path to building a just, peaceful, and lasting prosperity. Now it's up to the Nepal to implement it and graduate as a sustainable middle-income country by 2030. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kormaj. I know it's a great challenge, to meet the post-graduation development areas. This reminds me of the 2004, your case reminds me of the 2004 tsunami, just on the eve of the graduation. But I think this gives a lot more dynamism by the Nepalese people and the Nepalese administration in meeting those challenges. We wish you best of luck with the future programs that you have. With that, I would now like to invite Mr. Lai Tui Siliva, Assistant Chief Executive Officer, Finance Sector, Ministry of Finance, Samoa, to make a presentation. What are the most effective strategies to cope with post-graduation period once a country does not belong to a group of LDCs anymore, but still needs to grow rapidly? What is most profound institutional change in terms of international position of a state which has just graduated, and how does this impact development trajectory? Mr. Lai, please take the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, distinguished guests, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. As for the most effective strategies to cope with the post-graduation, in summary, we continued to develop and implement our national development strategy at the time, and so as our government reforms, of which include domestic resource mobilization, budget execution efficiency, fiscal consolidation, of which includes debt management, accommodative monetary policy with sound financial stability, ongoing developments in productive economic sectors and industries to drive growth, and continuous bilateral coordination with development partners and the international community with regards to development financing. Hence, achieving macroeconomic stability from that period up to now, so as the improved standard of living for all Samoans. As for the second question on any profound institutional change, well, based on my limited knowledge and the information I have, being graduated from LTC status in 2014 up to now, has not really made a convincing stance for any huge institutional change. Government, still ongoing, continued with its public finance management reform program to enhance government processes and systems so as to promote transparency and accountability. The only concern over time is the loss of concessional financing access, of which the multilateral institutions are continuing and will continue to provide this concessionality to our medium-term financing needs. As I may, as the chair, if I could quote a speech from our former Deputy Prime Minister that was expressed in the seats in 2014, September. Quote, Samoa graduated from LTC status, but seats is something we will never graduate from, as we will always be a small island nation. And the external risks we are vulnerable, to will also continue to overshadow us. No matter how well we may be doing in our structural progress, in this context, our paramount development goal is resilience building, a multifaceted objective with environmental, social, economic implications. Resilience building is within our reach in terms of governance and capacity, but it is beyond our domestic means financially and technically. We need stable and predictable external support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. You remind me of my country, and I think it's very important for us to note that while we graduate from the LDC status, we do not graduate from vulnerability status. We do not graduate from the issues with respect to building resilience, and therefore the continued support from the international community would be extremely important. With that, I thank you very much, Mr. Lai, and I would now like to invite Mr. Rajiv Biswas, Asia Pacific Chief Economist, IHS Markit, Singapore, to make your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The topic of my intervention is about mobilizing private capital flows for Asia and Pacific LDCs as they transition towards graduation. Of course, it's a very exciting time with the expectation that many, in fact, the majority of Asia and Pacific LDCs will be graduating, many within the period by 2021, and certainly over the next decade, the majority of the Asia and Pacific LDCs are expected to graduate. However, that does mean that their ability to draw on concessional financing from donor nations and their eligibility for tapping funds allocated for LDCs would be significantly reduced over time. Moreover, since per capita income levels for graduating countries will have been rising significantly in the lead up to graduation, their access to lending from the international financial institutions, such as the World Bank Group, may also be reduced. Therefore, it's very important for graduating LDCs to strengthen the role of private sector financing for their future economic development. However, the ability of different LDCs in the region to tap private capital flows is very differentiated. The role of private sector financing based on existing capital flows varies considerably among the Asia and Pacific LDCs. Large LDCs such as Bangladesh and Myanmar have been very successful in tapping private capital flows into their economies, whereas some of the smaller nations such as Timor-Leste, Vanuatu have much smaller ability to attract private capital flows and have been more dependent on donor financing in terms of overall capital inflows to support their economic development. So therefore, the issue is how to boost the role of private capital flows for the Asia and Pacific LDCs. And there's a number of major channels for private capital flows that could potentially be tapped, including domestic and international capital markets, foreign direct investment flows, and regional funds, as well as private insurance products. Let me firstly turn to the topic of equity and debt capital markets to consider what scope there is for Asia and Pacific LDCs to use that channel of capital markets to finance development. Most of the Asia Pacific LDCs do not have significant capital markets for equities or debt. Therefore, strategies for fostering the development of capital markets would need to be focused on the several LDCs that already have made substantial progress in developing their local capital markets. And by far the most important case and the most promising is Bangladesh, which has the most advanced capital market amongst the Asia and Pacific LDCs, and therefore could make substantial progress by accelerating capital markets reforms to strengthen both domestic and foreign international capital flows. And in the case of Bangladesh, major reforms that could help them to tap more private capital inflows would include the development of real estate investment trusts and infrastructure trust legislation to enable this kind of capital inflow to provide additional private sector capital for infrastructure financing. In the medium to long term, Myanmar also has potential for development of its domestic capital markets, although because the size of its stock market is very small and it's still in a fledgling state, it will take much longer. Turning to the second channel, if we look at the possibility of regional funds providing capital financing, most Asia and Pacific LDCs do not have significant domestic capital markets, so an alternative form of investment mechanism for them is to generate private capital through regional funds that raise capital on international capital markets and invest in different projects across the Asia and Pacific LDCs. Such regional private equity funds that use both public and also private sector financing offer a mechanism for leveraging private capital flows into LDCs. This is not a completely new idea. There have been such private equity funds that already have a track record, for example, into investing into the Pacific Island states, and I think there is potential for other similar funds to be developed to invest in infrastructure and other projects for the Asia and Pacific LDCs. Similarly, real estate investment trusts and infrastructure investment trusts could also be listed on regional stock markets and used to mobilize private capital flows for private infrastructure financing. And one very interesting possibility that's already been done by some private sector companies is for funds to be listed on regional stock markets in developed countries as well to raise finance for the LDCs. And this can include retail funds from investors in developed countries as well as institutional investors to provide funding for microfinance for LDCs and other developing countries. Turning to the third channel is foreign direct investment flows. And some countries amongst the Asia and Pacific LDCs already have a very strong track record of attracting FDI inflows, and these are Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. So for these four countries, there will be considerable benefits from further reforms to improve the climate for foreign direct investment and streamlining FDI investment processes, as well as creating portfolios of projects where key government approvals have already been given. Of course, there is scope for the other LDCs to also use this approach, so I think that offers considerable potential. And the last mechanism for raising private capital flows to LDCs that I want to talk about is the private sector insurance mechanism for risk mitigation. I think private sector insurers as well as public sector export credit agencies can provide insurance products that facilitate private sector investment in infrastructure projects in developing countries. The spectrum of such insurance and risk mitigation products is very wide, including political risk products, reinsurance for banks and corporates, as well as reinsurance for projects that are being funded by multilateral development banks. What's also very exciting, I think, is the scope to use insurance and reinsurance solutions as long-term risk mitigation strategies for managing the economic impact of natural disasters. And a number of such catastrophe risk insurance projects have already been initiated, including the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Assessment and Finance Initiative, which was created in 2007 with the support of a number of multilateral agencies and donors. So I think that these mechanisms offer considerable scope for accelerating capital flows from the private sector. But I think we need to stress that it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that an individual approach needs to be taken for each country according to their strengths and weaknesses. So I think at the end of the day, there needs to be a specific strategy for developing private capital flows for each of the individual LDCs that could be developed in conjunction with advice from the United Nations and also in consultation with other donor countries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Biswas. I think that was a very highly enlightening and very useful presentation. I think most of us, we have the biggest issue in post-graduation is, of course, financing development. And your presentation very clearly have listed some of the options, including developing your own capital markets, possibility of tapping regional finances, listing on other stock exchanges, promoting FDIs, and so on and so forth. I'm sure most of us would like to read and hear more of your experience in due course. With that, I would like to thank all the eminent panelists for their very valuable presentations and perspectives. I thank you. May I now invite all panelists to return to their reserved seats, and I kindly request the chair of the committee to return to the rostrum. And thank you very much.
I would like to thank His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Jalil, Senior Advisor to the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, and former Minister of Finance and Treasury of the Maldives, for moderating the panel. And I also would like to thank the high-level panelists. Thank you. It was a very informative discussion. Indeed, when you graduate from being an LDC, it's like you're given, a coin where there are two sides to it. On one side, that means that your per capita incomes have been increasing. But on the other side, that means that you no longer qualify for most of this ODA. But at the same time, it remains that you are a country with special concerns, either because you have, small island states or landlocked states. And for many of us here, the vulnerability remains. So I now would like to open the floor to statements from delegates. So as before, the statements will be read in the order with which they have been received by the conference officer. And I would like to urge all the speakers to please maintain the discipline of time. We have roughly 30 minutes for this. And again, we would like to start with statements from the members, then the associate members, then permanent observers, followed by statements from designated representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies and intergovernmental organizations, and then followed by statements from representatives of NGOs if the time permits. May I now call on the distinguished representative from Fiji. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is the first time I am taking the floor, please allow me to express my delegation's full confidence in your leadership. My delegation would also like to acknowledge the work of the ESCAP Pacific Office in Suva for its support to Pacific Small Island Developing States and ongoing technical assistance rendered to the Fijian government. We applaud ESCAP for facilitating the groundbreaking platform on the system of environmental economic accounting, or SEA, that will be adopted by the Fiji Bureau of Statistics to complement the compilation of national accounts. Madam Chair, During the recent COP23 in Bonn, Fiji's Prime Minister and COP23 President launched Fiji's National Development Plan, or NDP, with the vision of transforming Fiji. The plan maps out the way forward for Fiji and all Fijians to realize our full potential as a nation. For the first time, Fiji has a 20-year development plan, 2017 to 2036, and a comprehensive 5-year development plan, 2017 to 2021. In the true spirit of the 2030 Agenda of Inclusiveness, undergoing its rallying call of leaving no one behind, the National Development Plan was the outcome of a nationwide consultation process that involved the private sector, civil society, community groups, government, and general public. The National Development Plan recognizes the integrated nature of development and addresses the need for multi-sectoral solutions. We have put together an ambitious plan to underline the ambitious nature of the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals. Such plans cannot be achieved in isolation. Thus, we need ESCAP to continue and enhance its support to countries with special needs, including small island developing states like Fiji. It has been rightly noted that we face the biggest challenge in leveraging financing instruments to enable us to meet our development needs. The reasons are obvious and have been extensively covered in various forums and publications. But this is the first time this committee is convening, and I want to thank ESCAP Secretariat, in particular, the Macroeconomic Policy Financing for Development Division, for bringing this to our attention again. Unless we mobilize the means of implementation, especially financing, implementing the 2030 Agenda, let alone achieving it, will remain a challenge. In support of this, ESCAP needs to continue its work in building capacity in small island developing states like Fiji. It needs to be mindful of topical issues that need regional solution and others that are country-specific. Development assistance should be relevant and made fit for purpose. ESCAP has conducted trainings and workshops for countries with special needs in financial inclusions and SMEs, and increasing domestic public resource mobilization through strengthening compliance on the revenue collection front, which is key to creating fiscal space. From a small island developing states perspective, we need this capacity building support to continue. My delegation recognizes the continuous importance of ESCAP's work in supporting small island developing states under the Samoa pathway. Its comparative edge in providing policy advice from the Pacific Small Island Developing States experience and from the Pacific Small Island Developing States experience will pave the way for effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda. This view is well entrenched in our National Development Plan. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Fiji. I now call on the distinguished delegate from Japan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we understand challenges for the countries with special needs. However, Japan is very cautious about many use of strengthening without clarifying approaches and benefits in the section of matters for consideration of the document. We do not support if the Secretariat extends their activities without appropriate clarification, prioritization, or justification, or beyond the mandate. For instance, how does the Secretariat strengthen the mobilization of domestic revenues in the least developed countries? In addition, as discussed yesterday, there are many acknowledged international organizations working for macroeconomic policies. Particularly, we understand that there are ongoing international discussions on infrastructure financing joined by World Bank, ADB, and AIIB. So ESCAP should not repeat the same thing. Careful and strategic consideration on the role that ESCAP should play is essential. Such consideration would contribute to the high effectiveness and high efficiency of ESCAP's activity within its mandate, which is beneficial to all the member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Japan. So again, the call for greater complementation and avoidance of duplication so that we have effective use of effective and efficient use of resources. May now call on the distinguished delegate from Nepal.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the delegation, again, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and thanks to ESCAP for inviting and providing this opportunity. Madam Chairman, in Nepal, the 2030 Agenda enjoys a strong underpinning of the country's constitution itself. The right-based constitution provides the inclusive framework for sustainable development by guaranteeing the rights in multiple development dimensions such as health, education, and clean environment. The current development priority of Nepal is to focus fully on realizing SDGs. It demands that our constraints relating to the capacity, institutions, and resources are fully addressed. It was with this in the mind that Nepal undertook the policy initiatives for institutionalizing, mainstreaming, and localizing the SDGs into the national plans, programs immediately after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. Above all, Nepal's development path affected with the structural challenges such as landlockedness, as well as the vulnerabilities and climate change and natural disaster. Madam Chairman, as agreed in Istanbul Program of Action and Vienna Program of Action, we should create an enabling environment for LDCs and LLDCs to fully utilize their potentials. In this regard, Nepal stresses that the means of implementation commitments must match with the actions. Equally important to ensure the equitable benefits from international trading and financial system too. System-wide coherence needs to be maintained within this ESCAP in the ground. Clearly, on the current level of global efforts and partnership remains inadequate. While Nepal is committed to do the best by forging the partnership among public, private, and cooperative sector at home, it looks forward to increase the cooperation from UN agencies, development partners in terms of ODA, meaningful partnership, as well as technology facilitation and transfer for sustainable graduation. It would be instrumental if ESCAP can make some rigorous country-specific analytical studies, because our case is a little unique also, and some capacity building, training, and workshop on the mainstreaming, localizing, and institutionalizing this development agenda in LDCs and LLDCs with appropriate financing strategy, and make recommendation for generating, sharing, and sustaining the prosperity in the region. I thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate from Nepal. So clearly there are a number of issues and constraints that need to be addressed in order to attain the agenda for sustainable development. And I guess taking note of Japan's intervention earlier, that we should strive for complementation, greater collaboration, but at the same time making sure that no country is left behind in all this collaborative work. So are there any other countries that would like to deliver a statement? Yes, Cambodia? Bhutan. Oh, sorry, Bhutan. You have the floor, sir.
Bhutan is also one of the countries eligible for graduation based on March 2015 triennial review. And we have met the threshold in terms of GNI per capita and human asset index. But in terms of economic vulnerability index, we are quite far behind. And some of the challenges that we currently face are in terms of the small size of population. We are a country with a population of 700,000, and this makes it difficult in terms of per capita costs of service delivery. Also in terms of economy of scale, because of small size of population. We are also landlocked country, and because of that, again, the cost of transportation is very high. Our economy is also hydropower driven at the moment. In fact, hydropower contributes close to 20% of our domestic revenue and 15% to GDP. So we do lack economic diversification. Bhutan is also confronted with the challenge in terms of natural disaster. So glacial lake outbursts, landslide, floods, fires. So we are very vulnerable in terms of, if you look at it from economic vulnerability index. So keeping this in mind, strong focus in terms of economic diversification, job creation in our current 5-year plan, and also as we prepare for the next 5-year plan. So the request from our side is if UN ESCAP could continue supporting Bhutan together with especially the countries, LDCs, which are eligible for graduation, to really understand what it means to graduate, and also to prepare ourselves for graduation. In fact, last month we had a regional workshop in Thimphu in Bhutan on capacity building of LDCs, and many of our colleagues who participated in that workshop found it very useful. So thanks to Oliver, Sudeep, and we are hopeful that similar workshops, seminars, capacity building efforts will continue from ESCAP side. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Bhutan. I see that Afghanistan will also like to deliver a statement. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe graduation from LDC, especially for the landlocked countries, is very challenging. Afghanistan is also one of those countries. I would request the support of ESCAP for a number of the areas for capacity building, technical assistance, and some analytical work. That will include regional cooperation, diversification of the economies, and resilience against the natural disasters and shocks, and also for the structural reforms, for example, the public financial management, and other capacities of the national levels to do sustainable development and graduate from LCD. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Afghanistan. We have from, first of all, from Bangladesh. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam, for giving me floor. Actually, I would like to add some new information about Bangladesh, and you'd be happy to know Bangladesh have already achieved the graduation threshold, particularly in the 3 indicators area, and we have developed a roadmap just to face the challenges after graduation, that is post-graduation time. So government has formed a high-level committee just to assess the impact of graduation, and we believe that challenge creates some opportunity also. So we are ready to face that challenge, particularly in terms of reducing ODA and other trade issues, and also other financial help from developing countries. But Bangladesh is ready to face that challenges. And we are grateful to ESCAP for holding a workshop last year, particularly on the areas of technical cooperation, particularly on LDCs, and we sought further cooperation from ESCAP by holding workshop seminars so that our managers, particularly those that are in the civil service, they will be very much equipped about facing the challenges after graduation. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. I'm sure the other economies will be looking forward to that study and how to cope with the challenges of transition. May I now call the distinguished delegate from Mongolia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, everyone. So my country, Mongolia, is included in the list of landlocked developing countries. So one of the most valuable instruments for implementation of the Vienna Program of Action is International Think Tank for Landlocked Developing Countries, which was initiated by the government of Mongolia. We are happy to announce that in the 6th of October 2017, the multilateral agreement for establishment of an international think tank for landlocked developing countries entered into force. And this think tank, headquartered in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, become fully operational intergovernmental organization. So think tank will conduct research on every issues that are in interest of all LLDCs. And here we would like to ask you and ESCAP to continue its contribution to the landlocked developing countries, utilizing capacity of the international think tank. And furthermore, to support the think tank for LLDCs in its capacity building through trainings and other possible ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Mongolia. Again, another institution that can be a player in this collaborative effort. I see the distinguished delegate from China. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for giving me the floor. Just a very short comment. Madam Chair, distinguished participants, countries with special needs require considerable financial and technical support to implement the 2030 agenda from international community. In this regard, we are glad to see ESCAP has done a lot of work to support member countries. We sincerely request ESCAP could increase this support, including through policy coordination, capacity building, and regional views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from China. So it appears that there are actually recurring themes, but on a per country, you have different combinations of these issues. And it will be a big challenge, but I'm sure ESCAP will be up to it. And of course, taking in mind the suggestion to strive for complementation with other bodies, other multilateral organizations. Are there any other countries that would like to make a statement? Any other agencies, NGOs? Oh, there I see.
Timor-Leste.
Hmm?
Timor-Leste.
Timor-Leste. You have the floor, sir.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Timor-Leste, we use this opportunity to share progress on where we are on the LDC graduations. As all of you know, that Timor-Leste is the new country. We have 1.2 million population with the national income from 810 in the 2002 when we restored our independence, and then now we reach the GNI is around 3,767 per capita in the 2016. But again, this is not some indicators to be say that we will be graduate part of the LDC. The government of Timor-Leste, we doing some approach to give the guarantee we will get the graduation on the 2020. Some of the reform is doing in the national level. As I mentioned yesterday on our interventions, The government Timor-Leste doing some reform on the economic reform, fiscal reform, and also on the public administration reforms. Part of the economic and fiscal reforms, the government of Timor-Leste is doing simplifies the business registration procedures. So we start in doing like as the one-stop shop. We have one institution to doing all the issues related to the business registration. We also developing the national single windows to facilitate the export and import of the goods service, the tax administration modernization and reform of the support of the business, custom and trade facilitation reforms. The government Timor-Leste also approval of a regulatory framework to support the protection for the private investments. I use this opportunity like to give some of recommendation from the Timor-Leste. As you know, the new country, many of the challenges we facing, especially to graduate to LDC. On this respect, Timor-Leste like to be highlighted strongly, especially asking to committee to be considerate, especially on to doing the regional and national review based on the Istanbul program of action, include the tile assessment for each LDC, including the recommendation. The Timor-Leste delegation also like to request the committee for continued program of the capacity and capability buildings to support the LDC graduation and relate to the regional and the national assessment. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Timor-Leste. Any other member? Oh, I see the delegate from Russian Federation. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few short remarks. To save time, I will speak English. My country follows with great sympathy and interest the plight of countries with special needs in Asia and the Pacific towards sustainable development and their effort to graduate from especially category of the least developed countries, and we congratulate Bangladesh on achieving that. We liaised on multilateral formats and bilaterally with the countries with special needs, including small island development states, least developed countries, and landlocked countries. And especially I want to recall our cooperation within the framework of the General Assembly Second Committee, which ended its work last week in New York. And we cooperated closely with the group of 77 plus China, who introduced a relevant project of resolutions and supported all of them. And we are glad to note that those resolutions by Second Committee, they fully embrace Agenda 2030, and they thus show us the way how to proceed in deliberations by regional commissions. We compliment the Secretariat for the documents submitted under this agenda item, namely E/SCAP/CMPF1 and 2, and we do support their findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And those are very sound documents which are supported by grounded evidence and reliable data. My country has taken in the past a few steps to support financially the development of countries in special needs. For instance, I would like to recall a decision by Russia to allocate over $500,000 to the fund of SPECA program, which is a program co-administered by ECE, Economic Commission in Europe, and ESCAP, and all of its beneficiaries are countries, are landlocked countries, and one country which is the least developed. And the steering committee of SPECA, which just ended in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, complimented Russia for their contribution, and so SPECA has a way forward, and we would continue to support it. On equal footing, we are cooperating with small island development states. We supported the holding of the Samoa 3 conference, and we are considering allocating further finance for holding the fourth conference. And especially I want to know this regard resolution by the second committee on the pathway to Samoa pathway. And actually, so my last remark would be about energy, which is of paramount importance, especially from small island development state. And we would take steps to finance their participation at the upcoming second Asia-Pacific Energy Conference, which is previewed to take place this spring. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate from Russian Federation, as well as the support of your country to countries with special concerns. I see the distinguished delegate from India. You have the floor, sir.
Being cognizant to the fact that the Almaty Program of Action played a seminal role in creating awareness about the special challenges faced by landlocked developing countries globally and place their concerns firmly on the global development agenda, thereby increasing the visibility and recognition of such countries and their special needs at the international level. In part, due to this visibility and follow-up action plan, there was a concrete progress in increasing the capacity and efficiency of transport systems. India enjoys close historical ties with landlocked neighbors and attaches the highest priority to further enhancing our friendly and good neighborly relations, including through strengthening the trade relations and cooperations on transit issues. India's comprehensive agreements on trade and transit are crafted and implemented to bring the highest benefits to both countries and minimize additional costs to their economies. We have extended economic and technical support for infrastructure development and capacity building, apart from promoting regional transport and trade connectivity. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate from India for bringing up this very special need of landlocked countries with respect to infrastructure. Any other delegation? Any other member? So I see none. So we now come to the conclusion of this agenda item 3. And before I adjourn the meeting, the secretary of the meeting has some announcements to make. And I now invite him to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick announcement in the spirit of enhancing the experiences of the participants in this 3-day intergovernmental meeting on macroeconomic policy, poverty reduction, and financing for development. We have organized several workshops. So the one that is starting about 12:30 today will be on infrastructure financing studies in selected countries. It will be in conference room 4 from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before we adjourn, I would like to remind everyone that we shall resume the plenary at 2 o'clock, this same room, conference room 3, and we will be considering agenda item 4. This meeting is now adjourned, and have a pleasant lunch, everyone.